Okay, I'm going to show you how to solve an equation with a fractional exponent. There's the fractional exponent right there to the 2/3. So the first thing we want to do is isolate that fractional exponent. So we get rid of the minus 25. And then so now we have an option. And I like to look at it both ways just so that you can see. So the first way is understanding what that fractional exponent is. So that 3 turns into the index for your radical. So now it's a cube root. And then that 2 is just a squared like it normally is. Now this gets a little messy here, and this is where my students get a little confused. So I'm going to break it down to a simpler task. So pretend we had just x squared equals to 16. How would you get rid of the squared? Well, yeah, you'd square root it. So just don't forget the plus or minus, because that's a big deal, right? The reason why you're taking the plus or minus is because the original equation, x squared equals to 16, is asking what number, when you square it, gives you 16. And of course, you could do positive 4 or negative 4. Okay, so back to our problem. So how do we get rid of this squared? How do we get rid of that squared, right? When you have something squared, how do you get rid of that squared? And you're right. You just take the square root of both sides. Now this is going to look funny because you have a square root and then you have a cube root and you have square. It looks really messy, but just focus on the idea that you want to get rid of squared. So you get rid of it by taking the square root. And of course, we don't forget the plus or minus. So now, if you look, we've gotten rid of that squared, and now we just have the cube root of x minus 1 plus or minus 5. Okay, so now we just have to deal with that cube root, right? So how do we get rid of the cube root? We just cube both sides, no big deal. So when you're cubing plus or minus 5, you literally cube 5, and then you cube negative 5. Okay, the cube root and the cube cancel. And so you get x minus 1 is equal to 125 and negative 125. You just solve this like normal, you add 1. And so I'm just kind of shortcutting it here. I'm not writing a separate equation, but there you go. So our answer is x is equal to 126 or negative 124. We'll check this later. So I just kind of want to show you a different way of doing this, and perhaps this might be a quicker way for you to do this, say on a test, but I wanted to go through that, why we do what we do. Okay, so here's the equation again from where we stopped. I'm going to draw a line in the middle so that everybody knows that these are separate. I'm doing this from this point on again. Okay, so again, we have that equation x squared equals to 16. How do we get rid of it? And of course, you square root it. But remember that the square root of a number, so the square root of y, is also the same as y to the 1/2. Right? So instead of square rooting it, we could have taken it to the 1/2, which you would take the other side to the 1/2. Even though you see 16 to the 1/2, my brain thinks square root of 16, which of course, again, don't forget the plus or minus. Okay, so here's the deal. How do you get rid of that 2/3? Now, notice up here we have the squared and the 1/2, right? So we have this squared and this 1/2. And these two are canceling. And the reason why they're canceling is because they're reciprocals of each other. So we go back over to our problem, and the reason why these two are going to cancel right here is because they're reciprocals of each other, right? When you multiply reciprocals, it cancels and leaving a 1. Okay, so then you get x minus 1 is equal to. Now, when you're simplifying this, again, think about this number being the square root and this number being the cube, right? And then so we just simplify it. What's the square root of 25? Oh, it's 5. 5 cubed is 125. Again, never forgetting this plus or minus, right? Because this plus or minus, if you do forget it, you actually delete one of the solutions. So in the math world, you're supposed to be finding 2 answers, 2 solutions, and you, if you delete that plus or minus, you've just gotten rid of half of the solutions, essentially. Okay, enough of that. This is still the same. You add 1 to both sides. Look, you still get the same answer, 126 and negative 124. Yay! At this point, this is where kind of like the lower level math classes and the higher level math classes differ, where I always say always check your answer no matter who you are. It's absolutely necessary in the higher math classes because you could be looking at an extraneous solution depending on what problem you have. So instead of memorizing all the different places that you do have extraneous solutions, just make it a habit of always checking your answer. That just means plugging in your solutions to your original equation. So here I have the empty equation, and I'm going to fill in our solution one at a time. So there's 126, and I just go through and I simplify. Remember that the cube root of 125 is 5, and then I square that and I get 0 equals 0. Yay! And then I do the same thing for the other solution. You must check each solution independently of each other. So negative 124, which makes negative 125. Again, I'm going to cube root that. That's negative 5 squared. And the simplification goes like this. So in reality, you have two solutions that you found, and they both work. So now you have a solution. So there you go. That's how you do it. So you have basically two different ways to do this. So let me show you again. You have this way over here, which is basically like conceptual. Get rid of one thing at a time. Get rid of the cube root, get rid of the squared kind of thing. And over here, we kind of have like the quicker way to do it. This over here is based on this idea over here. So if you look really carefully, you see 3 halves. Here's the 3, and here, right here, the square root, that's the halves. So they're basically the same thing, it's just how you think about it. So hopefully this makes sense to you. Enjoy.